How much influence do you have in your home? Do your kids listen to you? Does your wife respect you? Do your neighbors know you to be an upstanding man? Do your coworkers and your CEO or your manager recognize you as competent in your field? Now, think about the possibility of increasing your influence in your family, work, and local area. Would you do it? What comes to your mind when I say that? Do you think that you could do it? Or here's actually a better question. Do you think that you could increase your influence without lording it over others or seeking it inappropriately or sinfully? Another name for influence is dominion. And another name for lording it over others is domination or domineering. Today, we're talking about how J.R.R. Tolkien's most mysterious character in probably all of his books, his whole legendarium, holds the key to establishing dominion and how you can increase your influence as a man and a father and a worker without domineering. This is Worldview Legacy, the show that helps Christian men become the worldview leaders their families and their churches need. My name is Joel Sedekase, and I'm here to help you, the Christian layman, to build a legacy so that you and your kids and your wife will be able to confidently articulate biblical truth, answer the world's questions, and see Jesus change lives as you share your faith. So how can you increase your influence in your home, work, and local area in a way that makes other people's lives better? The word dominion does sometimes get a bad rap. It makes people think of domination or domineering. But domination means overpowering and bending things and people to fit your will. Dominion, on the other hand, means overseeing the people and things under your care as they're meant to be, according to God's design. It's a good thing. When you understand this difference, you'll be that much closer to increasing your influence in a way that improves the situations of others. This is a Christ-like goal and definitely part of the legacy that you'll want to pass on to your own children. Today, we're joined by C.R. Wiley. C.R., or Chris, has written extensively about Tom Bombadil, and he's actually just authored a book called In the House of Tom Bombadil. In it, he unpacks who he thinks Tom Bombadil really is and why Tolkien included him in his stories. But also, he talks about how Tom Bombadil can help us to understand the nature of the world and how to increase our influence in it and how to be more joyful and have fun doing all of this. So if you've ever looked around at the areas in your life that seem disordered and wished that you could make a positive change, or if you've felt disrespected or silly, or even like you're not yet doing all the things that God wants you to do to teach and mentor and lead and build up the younger generation, this episode is for you. And if you're someone who enjoys a good story and wishes that you read more fiction, but you don't because you think that the really good lessons are all found in nonfiction, well, this episode is for you too. Today, we're going to answer the following questions. How Tom Bombadil exercises power in a counterintuitive way. Why Tolkien's most powerful character has so much joy. What it means to have dominion without domination. How increasing your knowledge can help you increase your influence, and also what kind of knowledge you need. Why having dominion like Tom Bombadil starts with studying your family members. How modern bureaucracies domineer and dominate. What is the Bombadil option? How to overcome fear when you're surrounded by chaos. What it means to be anti-fragile. And how to be more joyful and jocular in your home, and why you shouldn't really take yourself too seriously. We'll also talk about the first step that you can take to become like Tom Bombadil. If after this episode you have questions or want to discuss more about Dominion, or Tom Bombadil, or the Christian worldview, you should really know about our free community. This is where you can connect with over 500 others who are on the same journey as you. You'll get biblical answers to questions, information on other worldviews, and a better understanding of the tools of knowledge, truth, logic, science, and morality, and how to use them in discussion and debate. I'll tell you more about this group and how to join at the end of the show.
Hi, I'm Chris Wiley. I write under the nom de plume C.R. Wiley, and I'm a pastor and I serve a church here in the Pacific Northwest in the state of Washington. I live in a little town called Battleground, which is a cool name, and it's just outside of Portland, Oregon, believe it or not. So this is actually a suburb of the, sort of part of the greater Portland, Oregon metropolitan area. Anyway, that's who I am. I've done some other stuff too. Maybe we'll talk about that, or those things. But anyway, that's who I am.
I can't help but notice, Chris, when you take the cover of your book, which I know you drew, and you place it side by side to your profile picture, there's a certain level of resemblance. The beard's a little longer on Bombadil, but were you looking in a mirror when you made that book cover?
No, you're not the first person to say that, but no, I didn't have myself in mind at all. I was just one night, and in fact, when I drew it, I wasn't actually intending for it to become the cover of the book. I was just sort of working out an idea in my mind of what I thought Bombadil looked like, and if you do a search, like if you Google Tom Bombadil and look at all the images, there are a lot of bad drawings. I mean, just awful, horrendous attempts at trying to picture this character. And, Tim Hildebrand with his version, I mean, it's okay. But there was nothing out that I was very happy with. And so I thought, let me give it a try and see if I can't, envision something that I could be happy with. So he was that's kind of the close-up. I actually drew some other things that if people are interested, they can find that on my Instagram page. I was sort of playing around with different things. But that's how it came about. And then when it came time for the cover for the book, I just threw a bunch of drawings to the publisher and said, if you want to use these, in some way, fine. If not, no biggie. And they decided to do it, use that one.
You grew up in Western Pennsylvania, is that right?
Right. Well, yeah, I was born in Meadville, PA, which is in the western part of Pennsylvania, right off of I-79, and just a little south of Erie. And but anyway, that's where I was born. And then my father, who was an academic, was at the University of Buffalo, and then we were out of St. Louis, where my father was employed by Washington University in St. Louis. And then we ended up back in Meadville when I was a teenager. My sister, my mother, and me. So spent my teen years there.
I see. Okay. So I was wondering about that because I knew that you had said that you grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and but then you said that your dad was a prof at Washington University, which is in St. Louis. So I was trying to put that together. I love Western Pennsylvania. I went to college at Grove City College.
Oh, right.
Don't know if you've ever heard of that school.
Oh, sure. I got friends on the faculty, and my daughter's there right now. She's a senior, going to graduate here in May.
No kidding.
Yep.
What's she studying?
History.
No way. That's awesome. Well, I bet she has some of my old profs because I actually got my bachelor's in history from Grove City. So
cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And my future son-in-law, she's engaged, is also a history major there.
And, I know education's a big thing for you. Did you study philosophy?
Yes, I have. So I've always had a strong inclination in that direction, and I taught philosophy, but I was in seminary, and there was a strong component in my undergraduate program in philosophy as well as my graduate school, my first graduate school. I went to Harvard Divinity School to study ethics, so I was there for a while, and with the intention of going into academia full time, and I was teaching philosophy to undergrads, but the school I was with wanted me to get my terminal degree, and so that was what I was doing there at Harvard Divinity. But I decided that wasn't for me, and I left. Well, I wasn't cut out for the academy. I had a pretty good sense of where things were trending. All the nuttiness that we see today, it was very much growing, and it wasn't even embryonic in the 90s when I was at Harvard. It was pretty well developed, and you could kind of see where everything was going to end up. And so I thought I better cancel myself before they canceled me.
So, from what I've heard from you, the moment when you had your Tolkien conversion is when Pippin drops the rock down the well inside the mines of Moria, and it awakens something in the deep. And it said, and what you said was that also awakened something in you. Now, in the story, we know what was awakened was the Balrog. So my question is, are you comparing Tolkien to a Balrog?
Well, you could say that I was comparing myself to a Balrog. If something was awakened in me.
That's fair.
So maybe he was Pippin. He was the one that dropped the rock. But yeah, I mean, what awakened in me was a real interest in the story, and my imagination was excited by that episode in the story, and I acquired a taste. There was a kind of aesthetic that I sensed in the story that I had never encountered before, and really haven't found anywhere else. There's something about Tolkien's aesthetic. It's sublime, beautiful, nostalgic in a way. He talks about eucatastrophe and his essay on fairy stories. There were a number of things going on that were really elemental, kind of primal, and stirred me very deeply and awakened something in me of a longing for what I had a little taste of.
So let's talk about your love for Tolkien, Chris,
Sure.
Because it was something that was awakened when you were a kid, and then in 1977 you bought the Silmarillion.
Right. Yeah. So I had read, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings prior to trying to tackle the Silmarillion. I just, I thought one more, Tolkien book, and it was obviously a lot more challenging than those others, but I pushed my way through it. I was that dedicated. And so I was a Tolkien disciple before I was a disciple of Christ. I loved Tolkien before I was a Christian. It wasn't like, I was kind of slow to warm up to the Chronicles of Narnia. I was like a big Tolkien guy. And then I became a Christian, and then I kind of like, oh, okay, Tolkien had a friend named Lewis. Yeah, right. So I'll read that stuff too. That's how I got into Lewis. And they really all kind of go together for me. I didn't think there was something very wholesome about Tolkien, as you know, and very clean. Yeah. I never thought that there was any incongruity or inconsistency between being a Christian and loving Tolkien, even though at the time I didn't know anything about Tolkien's Christianity.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I think a lot of people love about Tolkien is he's easy enough for kids to understand. Not the Silmarillion, that's in its own league, but The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and yet there's this mysterious nature to the book. There are parts of it that can be hard to understand. I have to admit, I didn't know the first thing about Tom Bombadil. In fact, I heard it must have been on the Theology podcast. I heard you mention that you were writing a book on Tom Bombadil, and I had no idea who that was because I only knew Tolkien. I had read The Hobbit, but I didn't know anything about the books of Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers and The Return of the King. So now I'm reading those books with my kids, but could you introduce us to the character of Tom Bombadil? Who is he? Like, what is his role in the story? What can you tell us about this character?
Yeah. Well, he's an odd character and enigmatic even for real Tolkien fans. So in the story of The Lord of the Rings, that ring that Bilbo finds in The Hobbit turns out to be far more significant than he knows or realized. Turns out that it's actually the Ring of Power, which is the chief ring that had been forged by the Lord of the Rings, Sauron, in order to dominate the races of Middle-earth, the elves, men, dwarves, etc. And there were some rings that the elves had forged with his help that were intended to be used to help preserve the good things of the world. And then there were other rings that Sauron forged on his own for men and dwarves. And those rings were very directly connected to his ring of power, and that allowed him to dominate the people that and the persons who wore them. But the elves were able to resist his attempts to dominate them. Long story short, there's a great war. There is an alliance between men and elves, and Sauron is defeated. The ring is cut from his hand. It's lost. It's eventually found by a little character who becomes Gollum in the story of The Hobbit. But he's corrupted because of his possession of the ring. But he loses his ring in the mines or in the tunnels in the Misty Mountains, and is found by Bilbo. So Bilbo brings it home after many adventures, and thinks it's just a little ring that helps him to avoid the Sackville Bagginses and anyone else that annoys him because it makes him invisible.
Yeah, the annoying family members. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But it turns out that it, as I said, it was created by Sauron, and it's a ring that cannot be used for good purposes. It eventually corrupts the wearer, no matter what the person intends who's wearing it. So it has to be destroyed. Long and short, Frodo, who's Bilbo's nephew, is charged with the task of carrying the ring out of the land that they live in, this place called the Shire, in a quest to rid the world of the ring. And very early on in the Lord of the Rings, he and his three companions, hobbits named Merry, Pippin, and Sam, are pursued by black riders. These turn out to be the men who were under the dominion or domination of Sauron. These are men who wore the rings that he had made for them. They're remarkably powerful, dangerous creatures. They're the ring wraiths, kind of living but not really alive in any kind of wholesome sense. They're just terrifying personages. And they pursue the hobbits, and in order for the hobbits to escape, they take refuge in a place called the Old Forest. The Old Forest is not a wholesome place. It's almost like jumping out of the fire pan and into the fire. And as they're going through the forest, they come under the spell of a malevolent willow tree that draws them down to the Withywindle, which is the river that flows through the forest. And there, the tree actually captures two of the hobbits, Merry and Pippin, and almost swallows them alive. It actually does swallow one of them. And then Frodo and Sam discover what's occurred. They can't help their friends. They run around calling for help, kind of just in a panic. And then there's a strange character who just appears, and his name is Tom Bombadil. And he marvelously delivers the hobbits with a song. And then he kind of capers off, and the hobbits follow him to his house. And then they spend 2 nights and a day in Tom's house, and they meet his wife Goldberry, and they learn a lot of things about Tom. And they discover in the process that Tom is pretty powerful himself, perhaps the most powerful creature in Middle-earth. So that's kind of
which is the most counterintuitive thing.
Yeah.
So here you've got, when you read the story, it's this horrifying scene. I mean, it's really like suspenseful. There's this giant willow tree that is eating these hobbits alive. Literally, he puts them to sleep, and then one of them he entices out into the water with like this deep subliminal song they can barely hear, and then basically uses his root to push him under the water. Right. Imagine having a tree root on top of you. And then the others, he's slowly swallowing them, almost like, serpentine like, swallowing them whole. And it's like, man, what's going to happen? Someone's going to have to save them. Someone's going to have to come and burn down the tree. But how are they going to do that with the hobbits inside? You're going to have to cut it down. You almost get the sense it's going to have to be like Little Red Riding Hood with the woodsman coming along to just hack down the tree, the brave hero. And instead, here comes this little singing, dancing, as you put it, capering little bearded elf-like, dwarf-like guy who's not a hobbit, not a man, and something else. And he overcomes the tree by singing a little song. And he does it in this calming, joyful, gleeful way that's not silly, and yet has none of the gravitas that you would expect from like a Gandalf, or even an Aragorn.
Right.
What is Tolkien getting at in the aesthetic of Tom Bombadil? Why is this overwhelmingly powerful character so delightfully joyful?
Well, I think that's it. I mean, I think what Tolkien is expressing is, you could say, the power of goodness, and goodness, genuine goodness, does elicit joy. So Tom is irrepressibly joyful. I mean, he can't be. You get the sense that there's nothing that can unnerve him or something, or even annoy him, I guess. he just has something about him that he's self-possessed in the best sense of that word, or that term. And I think it's because Tom is the oldest creature in the world, that there's a point in the story where Frodo is talking with Tom and asks Tom directly, "Who are you, Master?" And Tom explains a little bit concerning his own history, and he says, "I'm the oldest. I can remember the first acorn. I can remember the first raindrop." And so consequently, we've got this person who remembers the entire sweep of history in Middle Earth, going back to the very creation of the world, and at the same time, he doesn't seem to be bored by just the sort of the daily round. He just finds I guess a reason to be joyful just by existing, and through, and so that's I think pretty profound if you think about it for any length of time. I think the thing that sort of is off-putting for many people when it comes to Tom is he does come across as kind of ridiculous. He's wearing bright yellow boots and a blue jacket. He's got this face that's like a bright red apple, we're told, because of his, I guess, ruddy complexion and his laughing, his joyful disposition, and his songs are kind of nonsensical, it seems, and for those reasons, people just say, "Why would Tolkien, put this character in the story at this point when, there's this grand adventure just about to unfold?" But he does. There he is, and I think there are good reasons, but that he's there.
One of the things that's really cool about Tom Bombadil is he exercises dominion without falling into domination. Could we explore that a little bit? And
sure.
One of the things I love in your book on Tom Bombadil is that you explain the difference between the two concepts. Well, how would you explain the difference between dominion and domination?
Well, I think domination is about control, and when you dominate, you are looking to extract some good from something without giving some good in return. It's an unequal exchange. It's a kind of robbery, you could say. Whereas in dominion, there is a kind of communal element to it, where there's obviously an enrichment that occurs for both parties. So you can think about it in that way. So domination is something that we could describe as fallen dominion. When we hear about dominion, and sort of generally today, everybody thinks that dominion is just a synonym for domination, and it's not. But because people tend to think in that way, when they hear in Genesis chapter 1, God granting dominion to the man and the woman that He's made, they think of that in the worst light possible. This is like carte blanche. We get to do anything we want to all the other creatures of the world. We get to, just destroy everything, and kind of like we see with Sauron. Sauron or Saruman, that's what people think that means. And what I think is more accurate, more to the point, and I think it does justice to what we see in Scripture, but also I think does justice to kind of in a sense that we all have, that this is the way it actually is supposed to work. What we see with Tom and Goldberry is two very powerful creatures who have clearly dominion in their home, but also beyond it. And the dominion is exercised in such a way so as to serve the genuine interests of everyone, whatever the creature happens to be that is in the dominion.
Excuse me for 1 second.
Sure.
My 4-year-old daughter just came in. I need to see what's going on. Sorry about
Sure,
that.
sure, go ahead.
Hi.
And it really hurts.
Oh, sorry, Jojo. Look at me, sweetie. Why don't you go put an ice pack on it? Daddy's recording right now. So I want you to go. Can you go put an ice pack on? Go ask Fia.
No.
Joseph, I want you to go ask Fia to put an ice pack on.
I don't want it.
Okay, here's what I want you to do. Go drink a glass of water and stay off of it. Go have a seat, okay? All right, love you, sweetie. Hey, Josephine, go back out that way and close the door. Thank you. And Jojo, don't come back down, okay? You ask Fia if you need help. I love you, sweetie.
A little altercation
Sorry
there?
about that. Big Brother did something. I'm sure it was very unintentional, but to her, the world was ending. So.
Right. Well, I know that scene.
Figured you would. Okay, how does that translate for us? How do we better understand the nature of the world that we're living in so that we can serve it without domineering and dominating over it?
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is in a household. I mean, I had an opportunity to watch you interact with your daughter a minute ago, and it was you did a good job, and I think you were exercising dominion in that situation. You weren't thinking about it necessarily, but you told her what she should do. You sent some instructions to another child. There were some things you were doing in the interest of the entire household. It wasn't just about you. It wasn't just like Joel saying, "Stop bothering me, get out of here, go back to your little room under the stairs," like Harry Potter or something.
Yeah.
Clearly. What you have in your household is a dominion being exercised in a good way. There's just a simple reality. You have more power than your children. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. And you also have the responsibility to exercise that power and your authority in a way that is genuinely enriching to those in your household. So if you have that frame of mind that the enrichment, the flourishing, as Aristotelians like to, Thomas like to use that term, flourishing. They use it all the time. Yeah. But if your children, your wife, the other people who are under your authority are genuinely flourishing, then you're exercising dominion in the way that you are supposed to exercise it. If you're exercising dominion in a way that just serves your ego, is harming the people around you, makes you feel powerful and them feel weak, well then you're clearly dominating them, and it's impoverishing them, but it's also impoverishing you in the process.
How so?
Well, you're not actually enjoying the kind of dominion that we see Bombadil enjoying. Whenever you look at, we get little glimpses of Saruman. We don't have any sort of real insight into Sauron. He's just this malignant shade and the kind of on the edge of things.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine that he's a happy guy. These are people. These are creatures who are always worried about things getting out beyond their control. Right? They're afraid. They're full of resentment and anger, and they're schemers. They're always trying to find a new way to get people or creatures, other creatures, to do what they want. And for apparently no greater purpose than their own maybe need to be in charge.
Man, it's interesting how you bring up fear too, because when you think about Sauron, you think, well, for me, I think he induces fear in others. It's terrifying to think of this all-seeing eye watching you. And yet he's afraid. He's afraid of losing his grip. He's afraid of losing his power, his influence. He's afraid he'll never get the ring back. And, this is something that you've written about in the past too, Chris, is you've talked about when pastors worry too much about what people think of them, whether it's their session, their elders, the denomination, the congregation, whatever, the people on Twitter, who knows? That's a thumbscrew that can turn and torture them. And what does that lead to? Does that lead to a desire to exercise domination instead of dominion?
Yeah, I think it can. I think that kind of fear compels people to do what they think they need to do to make sure they don't lose control. And in a strange way, they also end up, they don't actually speak the truth any longer. They become calculating in everything that they do and say, because they're looking to use their words to bring about the outcomes that they think that they can by saying things a certain way or doing things rather than just speaking the truth. Now, speaking the truth doesn't mean that you're just haphazard and careless and calloused, but I do think that if the real reason you're being circumspect in your words is not because you care about the people you're talking to, but because you care about losing your grip on things, you're not actually demonstrating care for someone else. You're basically just kind of serving your own interest. You're just using language
you're using
to do
people
that.
as a means to an end.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things I'll tell you, when I was a kid, there was something that I saw on TV that really it kind of threw me for a loop. And I just thought of it in what you were talking about with how Bombadil exercises dominion. Okay. So it was an episode of Mr. Rogers. Do you remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So in that episode, Mr. Rogers is talking to the kids in the audience, which was me at that time. And he was saying, your parents, I forget exactly how he put it. Your parents are in charge of you, but they don't own you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, I'd never thought of that. I was maybe 5 or something. I never thought, my parents don't own me. Interesting.
Right.
So, and of course that's true. And now as a dad, of course I recognize that. But what does it mean to have dominion to have mastery without ownership?
Yeah, that's actually the way Frodo and Goldberry explore this. So when Frodo arrives with the other hobbits at Tom's house, Tom is out of the room. They meet Goldberry, and Frodo is puzzled by Tom's presence in the story as the reader is, and he asks Goldberry, "Who is this guy? Who is Tom Bombadil?" And her response is, he is the master. And of course, Frodo thinks like you and me, and his response to that is, do you mean this whole land and everything in it belongs to Tom Bombadil? And she's like, what? No, that doesn't follow. Everything belongs to themselves, but Tom is the master. And that is the thing that is important to remember. Mastery in the sense that we have been granted as human beings mastery in our world at large, but even in our worlds, our little spheres that we find ourselves in, doesn't mean that we own anything. Least of all people or other creatures. We don't really own people. We're not the maker of those people. God made those people. They serve his purposes. We're going to be held accountable for how we interact with those people because they're not ours. They belong to God. Yeah. So now Tom doesn't get into that kind of, or Goldberg doesn't get into that kind of discussion. But I think that's what is going on underneath the surface. I think, I think that Tolkien very deliberately is developing, a way of thinking about mastery and dominion in the story in order to contrast Tom with the other figures in the story that are evil. You could kind of put them into three categories. You could say there are the evil characters like Sauron and Saruman, and then you have this character Tom Bombadil, who's just sort of like crazy, sort of into his own world, and then you've got good characters who are having to exercise judgment and act in the world in ways that sometimes require them to take a measure of control in certain situations, like Gandalf, Aragorn, Galadriel, these really great characters. But those are also the characters who are afraid to touch the ring because they're afraid that because they do have to exercise some control sometimes, they might, in the process of trying to use the ring, become trapped by the ring. But Tom, as you know, is completely aloof and I guess inoculated against the temptation to use the ring.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see his interaction with Frodo and just his almost frivolity towards this incredible, terrible, evil power of the ring. And I think part of that, it seems like part of that is rooted in the fact that he does know how things work. He knows the face of evil. He understands that evil is a corruption of the good. And it's almost like that knowledge eliminates the temptation for evil. Because, well, why would I want the substitute? I'll take the real thing any day. Why would I want the cheap knockoff version, as opposed to the real handcrafted, like the really good thing. So bringing this down to where the rubber meets the road for us as men in our households, what knowledge of the world and how it works is needed for us? What should we be studying? What should we be students of? Like, is this books? Is this relationships? How do we get that knowledge?
Yeah, I think books and relationships are really important, and we can learn a lot through those things. I think, though, what I pick up with Tom is that he's a student of creatures. So, during that day in which he regales the hobbits with all these stories, when they're in his house and it's raining, they can't go anywhere because of the rain. He's telling them stories about the various creatures of the world and the trees and the animals and other things. And they learn that he knows a lot about even them and their families and about the Shire. Tom is a very observant character. And I think we, as fathers and husbands, need to study those in our care, under our authority. We have to keep our eyes open and look to understand, not just the general categories, boy, girl, man, woman, that kind of thing. Those are important. Especially in our world today, which seems to have lost sight of the nature of those different things. But our particular people, so like with my children, I came to see early on that these kids came pretty much prepackaged with certain characteristics. In other words, they weren't just like tabula rasa. They weren't just like waiting for me to form and shape them out of nothing. From the start, they had kind of dispositions and sort of interests and so forth. And so I tried to observe and work with the grain, so to speak, in the case of each child. So like my oldest son, he was the athlete. He had an interest. His first word was ball. he had an interest in playing baseball and basketball and just about anything you could do with a ball. From, when he was a little guy, he could barely walk. It was just like he would hold on to the ball in his crib. He'd want to play catch with me out of the crib, that kind of thing. Cool. My second son, he didn't have any interest in athletics. He was more interested in building things. So today he's a welder and he's a furniture builder and works for a pretty large manufacturing company that makes commercial buildings. And so he's a steel worker. But pretty early on, I realized, okay, if I try to pursue the same activities with him as I pursue with my oldest son, it's just going to frustrate both of us. He just didn't have that interest. Yeah. And then my daughter had her own set of interests. So I tried to study the kids and keep, my eyes open and kind of learn where they're, how they, kind of learn what their interests were and what how the grain was sort of how the grain worked in each of them. Meaning the grain like in a piece of wood, it's what you get, and you work with the grain. You don't try to work against it. So I think that the same thing with my wife. My wife's a particular kind of person. She's obviously my wife. She's very feminine, but at the same time, she has her own particular interests and her own particular gifts, and so I try to work with those.
What happens when you're working with wood? What happens if you go against the grain?
Well, things split. They don't. It's hard to work against the grain because you're trying to do something that the grain or the wood isn't sort of predisposed to do. You can force it. One of the things that we do with modern construction techniques is that we just kind of grind everything down to dust and then form it into whatever shape we like. That's what medium density fiberboard is. It's just that. Okay. We take out all of the sort of the intrinsic characteristics of the wood that it's made out of and just turn it into particles and form it into whatever shape we want. And that's really I think that's the way bureaucracies in general work today, particularly government bureaucracies. Wow. They have absolutely no capacity for working with the grain. Everything's supposed to do what it's told. That's a good insight, because if you think about, the wood, once you grind it down, each of those individual grains can be manipulated however you want. And some will be lost, and it doesn't really matter as long as the finished product is made up of some of these different grains. And that's what bureaucracies and godless governments do, isn't it? When they try to break down the structures of society that God's put in place, the household, for example, and every individual now becomes a individual grain, something to be molded into the shape of the image of whatever the bureaucrat wants. Yeah, I mean, I think that you see that. Oh yeah, the analogy is pretty accurate all the way down. I think governments really like working with individuals because individuals are largely helpless and subject to the controls that governments have for getting things done, manipulating things. Wow. So, if we go back to construction and sort of techniques that maybe were employed in the past, often what you'll see is a very idiosyncratic approach to building that characterized things before the advent of power tools. When everything had to be sawn by hand or nailed directly, by hand or what have you, or even drilled by hand, there was a tendency to say, okay, what does this particular piece of wood want to do? Let's work with that. Let's not try to force it because I'll spend all day sawing if I try to. I need to work with this thing. And today, like you noted, when we can break everything down to the smallest components, then through heat, pressure, glue, whatever, create, perfectly square or squared slabs of material. By the way, those slabs of material are really easy to cut and really easy to form and shape. So if you get a router and you work with medium density fiberboard, there's a lot of dust that kicks up, but it's as smooth as butter. There's very little resistance. And that's exactly what a government wants, is very little resistance. We've seen with the Canadian truckers, there was a little bit of resistance there, and so they just pulverized them.
Yeah, man. But then, think about what kind of furniture you'd rather have.
Right.
I used to have this desk, and I still sometimes kick myself for getting rid of it, but it didn't fit in this new office. But man, Chris, it was this beautiful 100-year-old desk, just, handcrafted, real wood, just absolutely beautiful. And now in my office, I've got these things that look like wood. I'm sure that they're wood at some level, but there's like a veneer, and it's, who knows even what it's made out of. It feels like plastic when you tap on it. And it's like, these things will last, I don't know, a couple of years, and I don't have to get new ones.
Yeah, you're not going to see somebody on a television show 100 years from now saying, "Hey, look at this great find. I found this desk that was, that sold at IKEA, and it's made up of it's simulated wood grain surface, but beneath the surface there's nothing but medium density fiberboard. Isn't this great?" No, everybody would say no, that's garbage.
Yeah. There's an article that you wrote a few years back called "The Bombadil Option." What is the Bombadil option, and what can we learn from this character of Tom Bombadil?
Yeah, well, it was originally written for Front Porch Republic, which is a different, online publication, and a good one. It was obviously inspired by Rod Dreher's Benedict option. So, the Benedict option, what Rod was up to is, he was taking a kind of throwaway line from Alistair McIntyre in his book After Virtue. At the very end of that book, McIntyre notes that we've come to a point in the history of Western civilization where things are pretty much entering into a new barbarism, and we need to have an institution or institutions that will help us weather this dark period in our history. And so, in the course of his description of what we need, he says we need a new Benedict. And so that was the basis for the Benedict option that Rod writes about. Anyway, so hearing that, I thought, I think that there's another component to this. When Rod is talking about what needs to happen, he's referring, by and large to the church. What kind of institution the church needs to be, or what maybe the church can do in the way of founding some institution or institutions to help us kind of weather the storm. And I thought, well, there is an institution that we all can have, sort of participate in our own lives, and that's our households. And if we had, the right outlook, we could even see our houses kind of serving the same purpose as, these monasteries served in the past. And so I just got thinking about that, and I thought, well, here you have Tom Bombadil. That Tom is in a world that's fallen apart. He lives right between the Old Forest and the Barrow Downs. Now, the Barrow Downs are where the Barrow Whites live, who are, pretty scary ghosts. So you got a haunted graveyard, and you got a kind of a wild and unruly forest, and there's Tom's house full of light and joy and singing, and it's a great place. So I was reflecting on how our houses can be like that. By the way, Rod Dreher, who wrote the Benedict option, I know him, and we actually had a talk about this. He said, "I love that Bombadil option thing you did."
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that was kind of fun. But so that was the inspiration for that. The Bombadil option is, establishing a dwelling in which the members of that dwelling, a household, are a source of help and delight to each other in that house. So, as I got into in that little article, I described, the delight that Tom enjoyed in the presence of Goldberry. He obviously loves her and delights in being with her. And I get the sense that the feeling is mutual. And so you've got this household
seems to be.
Yeah, this household that's a really great place to be. And I think that's really what we all kind of long for. And so I think, pursuing that is something that we all can aspire to do. And, it's where we live. It's the people that we're living with. Now, our households, there's a lot more that go that to them than I think that many modern people tend to appreciate. And some of the things that I write about in my books, Man of the House and Household and the War for the Cosmos, are intended to explore those dimensions of our households that a lot of folks are kind of blind to, or they suffer from a kind of cultural amnesia about. And I was just trying to bring those things back to at least, our minds, so that we can consider them and perhaps revitalize or revive some of the practices of our ancestors in ways that are appropriate to our time.
Yeah, recontextualizing them for where we're living now. We're not on the edge of a haunted graveyard, but culturally, in many ways, we kind of are, actually.
Right.
What does it mean for us if we're going to take the Bombadil option? How do we overcome the fear of the haunted graveyard and the chaotic forest in between which we find ourselves? There's a lot of reasons in our flesh to be afraid today. How do we take the Bombadil option and have joy instead of fear? Yeah,
I think in Tom's case, he knows things, and I think that's true that that when you master certain skills, there is a kind of competence and gravitas that follows that makes it possible for you to assess pretty quickly the threats and the opportunities in any given situation. So I think if you are a person who has a range of competencies, if you can work with people, work with tools, have a sense of sort of how the financial world works, in other words, these skills that are functional, and there is a kind of carryover. There tends to be a kind of synergy that occurs between them. If the more you have mastery over these sort of spheres of life, I think the less likely you are to kind of be subject to the manipulations of, say, employers or even social media, what have you. You'll be able to fall back upon your own resources, and they won't be meager. And I'm not talking about like a lot of money in the bank. I'm just talking about kind of a wealth of knowledge, and also if over time, if you're a virtuous person, you're going to have people who you've had interactions with that have been those interactions have been positive, and you're going to have goodwill. So the combination of I think mastery over certain skills and then goodwill, those things can go a long way toward helping you in times when you're facing threats that people who don't have those resources find that they find that they have to, in some sense, capitulate and do what they're told.
Yeah. How does that connect with the idea that you've talked about before about being anti-fragile? Yeah,
well, I think anti-fragility, are you familiar with Nassim Nicholas Taleb and his anti-fragile, sort of the book Anti-Fragile?
A little bit, but my listeners might not be.
So what he describes is basically there are essentially three kinds of, I guess, conditions that you can find yourself in. One is fragile. When you're fragile, you're obviously easily broken, and then you have the resilient or I don't know if that's the term he uses, but basically the idea is that you can take a lot of punishment. It wears you down over time, but you can take a lot. But then anti-fragility is actually takes I guess resilience to another level, and the more stress that you face, the stronger you get. So you see now anything can go too far. You can be overwhelmed and be overcome in such a way that your inner resources, your ability to heal and learn, can't keep up with the assault or the pressure. But in the course of your life, if you face a number of challenges and you overcome them, then with each thing that you've overcome, you're that much more capable for, when it comes to handling other things.
This is something that I wanted to ask you about. I've been curious about. So you have an article called Bombadil at Home. In that, there's a quote, and you're pretty direct, Chris. You say, "Fathers, when it comes to dominion in your houses, be like Bombadil." That's pretty straightforward. And so in the story you're just telling, I'm thinking, okay, the knowledge leads to the confidence, leads to the lack of fear. What about, so as dads, how can we be more happy, more joyful, more Bombadil-like in our homes?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a kind of jocularity that a father is sort of known for. I think paradoxically, you can be a jocular father and have the ability to project authority. So Lewis actually gets into this, and this is actually something that characterized Jupiter, the god in the Roman pantheon, would be Zeus in the Greek pantheon. The word or the name Jupiter, brings the planet to mind. But another name for Jupiter is Jove, Jove, and that's where we get the word jovial, laughter. So, like when a father is wrestling with his kids, he's clearly, dominating the room. Now he may let his kids push him a little bit with great effect, fall over, and then they just laugh, and he laughs, and all that kind of stuff. But there's not a moment where he feels any, threat.
Right.
He's just having a good time, and at any given moment, he can just pick a kid up with one hand and hold him over his head and swing the kid around, and then gently put the child down, as the child is laughing away, and he's having a good time too. I think that's the way our fatherhood should be sort of understood all the time, even when you're disciplining. When you're interacting with, even when you're interacting with your wife.
How?
Well, I mean, what you have is because you really love these people and you have their best interests at heart, and that oftentimes, particularly with kids, that they're just out of touch with reality. That's kind of what's going on. They're out of touch with reality, and you can kind of laugh and sort of like through your laughter, not mock, but
no, right.
It's more of a kind of a reality check. This is not that serious, little girl. This is. I can see you're all worked up. And you put your hand on her head and tussle it a little bit and say, it'll be a tomorrow. That kind of thing, Now, her response at that moment is like, take me seriously, take us, but no, I'm not going to take you seriously because there's nothing serious about this moment. This is fun, and you need to learn to laugh at yourself, little girl. You have to learn how to see the humor in the moment. And now, that needs to carry over into your own life, and into the larger issues that you're dealing with too. And because you have confidence that God is in control, and you have an understanding of His working and so forth, you can laugh. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't times to cry. I mean, think about Ecclesiastes, and there's time for everything. But I think in terms of the characteristic emotion that we should see in our homes, it should be joy, if we can call joy an emotion. There should be laughter. There should be, lightheartedness. There should be gratitude. There'll be times for, some corrective words, some hard things that have to be done. But even then, there ought to be a sense kind of beneath the surface that this is a joyful household. How do you cultivate that yourself? I think that you shouldn't take yourself too seriously. Now, this is a paradox. Again, I'm not talking about undermining your own authority. What I mean is by not taking yourself too seriously is don't think that every little thing you do is the world is sort of like kind of on the edge of sort of falling off the cliff if you don't do the right thing. Yeah. Right. If you have a sense that your rule is to serve the greater good and the happiness, understood in the best sense of that term, of every member, then you can have that kind of joyful disposition that's jovial in the sense that Jupiter was jovial. There's this marvelous scene in the Aeneid where, Aeneas is the son of Venus, for goodness sake. Can you imagine having Venus as your mother? And she's concerned for her boy. He's on the bad. He's on the wrong side of some people, some goddesses and stuff, and they're out to get him. And she's concerned that he make it in the world. And she goes to her father, Jove, and she asks him to bless her son, who is obviously his grandson. and the scene, this image that of his sort of his love and his regard and his joy that he has in his daughter Venus is really remarkable. It just it almost brings tears to your eyes, the way Virgil describes this jovial fatherly interaction. He kind of smiles, and it's like his face is like the sun, and he just kind of takes and tussles Venus's head. Little girl, he'll be fine. I have got a plan for that boy. And then she says, he's going to be a great king. He's going to be a great ruler, the father of a great people. And then she's consoled, that her son has her father's favor.
It reminds me of Romans 8:28. God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Of course, the difference being that our God is real and right. Virgil's Jove is fictional, or at the very least rooted in not God, but there's such a deep truth there.
I think he captures something unwittingly about the nature of the true Father.
Yes. Okay. And so this could be a Romans 1 situation,
right,
where God's eternal power and divine nature are shining through the things that have been made, through literature, right. no less. And when you started talking, Chris, when you started getting into jocularity, one of the things I was curious about is, man, how does this tie in with gravitas?
Oh yeah,
you've talked a lot about gravitas in your books, and I'm thinking, man, gravitas, jocularity, those don't seem to go together, But I can see it. If you maintain a sort of dignified jocularity, not a clownish, gesturely,
right,
where you're, as you said, you're undermining your authority, but it's dignified, and it comes from a place of strength and dare I say dominion. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, you're exercising dominion in the interest of your children and your wife, and because you love them. And you want the best for them, then when you exercise authority, it's in the spirit, this delighted spirit, because you're wanting the best for those under your care.
All right. So at the end of this, what do you want our listeners to do? What would be the next best place to send them? Is it your Bombadil book?
Yeah, I think Bombadil, I mean, if you're a lover of Tolkien and you have an interest in that enigmatic character, then I hope that you can get a hold of the book, and hopefully it'll be worth your time. The other stuff I write, if you're interested in household, you can always go to my author website, crwiley.com. Not that I spend any time on it. It's just basically a place where I post things every once in a blue moon, like an interview like this or something. And
yeah.
But that's there. Well, I'm glad to have been on the show. Thanks for asking.
Thank you so much, brother, and I will talk to you later.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right, so now you know. Tom Bombadil exercises power in a counterintuitive way by combining jocularity with gravitas. Tolkien's most powerful character has so much joy because he understands his environment and he knows those under his care well. He knows how to exercise dominion in a way that helps things to thrive as they were intended to thrive. This is what it means to have dominion without domination. You heard how increasing your knowledge can help you increase your influence, and that the first kind of knowledge that you need is knowledge of those under your care. Modern bureaucracies domineer and dominate, but the Bombadil option means doing things differently, establishing a dwelling where the members are a source of delight to one another. You heard how you can overcome fear when you're surrounded by chaos through mastering the skills that you need in order to quickly assess threats and opportunities as they arrive. This is part of what it means to be anti-fragile. Remember, we talked about that, about developing toughness through overcoming hard things. And Chris also told us how to become more joyful and jocular, and that you shouldn't take yourself too seriously, because joy, jocularity, and gravitas work well together. And the first step to becoming like Tom Bombadil, get C.R. Wiley's book, In the House of Tom Bombadil. It's available from Canon Press, and the link is going to be right down there in the show notes. Now, if you want to build a worldview legacy for your family, then join the Think Squad group now. Now is the perfect time to become the worldview leader that your family and church need. All you have to do is to open up Facebook and search for Think Squad. That's ThinkSquad. Think Squad. Answer the short membership questions, and that's all it takes. Thanks for listening to Worldview Legacy. Thank you to Chris Wiley, my guest, for joining me today. This episode was produced by yours truly, Joel Sedekase, and is a production of the Think Institute.